Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're strapping in for a really fascinating exploration. We're looking into how our bodies handle physical exercise when, well, the air we breathe and the pressure around us changes quite a bit.
That's right. We've got this great chapter to guide us, and it covers, the whole spectrum, exercising in normal air, low oxygen situations, high oxygen at normal pressure.
And the really interesting one, high oxygen under increased pressure. That's hyperbaric oxygenation, or HBO.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So our mission today really is to get under the skin of how these different conditions, oxygen levels, pressure, affect us when we're physically active.
We want to find those surprising effects, maybe some potential benefits, but also the drawbacks, right?
Absolutely. The upsides and the downsides.
Okay, so let's kick things off with the basics. The everyday situation, exercising in normal air, normoxia they call it.
Right.
We all know that feeling. You start moving, breathing gets heavier. Well, normally just sitting around, we use about 150 milliliters of oxygen per minute.
Something like that, yeah. But get into even moderate exercise, and that can shoot up to around 1,000 milliliters per minute. It's a big jump.
And if you're really pushing it, like marathon levels of intense activity.
Oh, then it can be maybe 20 times your resting rate. Huge demand.
Wow.
But what's quite amazing is how well our bodies usually cope, especially with milder exercise. There was this interesting study with people who had metabolic syndrome.
Right, I saw it.
They tailored exercise programs for them, and the result was, on average, about a 10% improvement in their peak oxygen consumption.
10%. That really shows how even moderate activity can kind of fine-tune that oxygen delivery system.
It absolutely does.
And it's not just the muscles thanking us, is it? Exercise does some pretty amazing things upstairs, too, in the brain.
Oh, definitely.
Ugh.
Think about BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor.
Right, BDNF.
Exercise gives that a real boost, and it's
Okay.
it's like fertilizer for your brain cells. Helps them survive, improves learning.
And protects against cognitive decline
Right.
as we age.
Exactly. Plus, there's fascinating stuff emerging about gene expression changes, too. Exercise is genuinely brain food.
Okay, all right, so that's the baseline. Now let's switch gears. What happens when oxygen is scarce? Let's talk hypoxia during exercise.
Right, hypoxia. So, in this context, we're talking about when the partial pressure of oxygen in your blood, think of it as the oxygen concentration or strength, drops below about 40 millimeters of mercury, 40 milli-Hg.
And when does that happen?
Well, it can occur during really exhausting exercise, even at sea level, or, more obviously, at high altitudes where the air is thinner.
Makes sense.
Also with carbon monoxide exposure, or in people with certain lung conditions like COPD.
Okay, so if you're exercising under those chronic low oxygen conditions, what are the main changes in the body?
Well, several key things. Right. First, your arterial oxygen saturation goes down. Less oxygen coming in, right?
Logically.
Your maximal cardiac output, the peak amount of blood your heart pumps, also tends to dip, often because your max heart rate is lower. But the body tries to adapt. It often increases hemoglobin concentration, more carriers for the oxygen that is there.
Ah, compensation.
Yeah. But despite that, you still see reduced maximum oxygen flow in the muscle capillaries, those tiny vessels, and even changes within the muscle cells themselves, like fewer of those vital oxidative enzymes.
Which sort of brings up the medical side of things, like using HBO, hyperbaric oxygen, if someone's limited by hypoxia due to a medical issue.
Exactly. HBO might be considered therapeutically to help get more oxygen delivered where it's needed, enabling some activity.
And this is a big but, using it to boost performance in sports.
Absolutely forbidden. That's considered doping, plain and simple.
Okay, good clarification. Now let's dive maybe literally into the next area. Exercising in hyperbaric environments. High pressure, like diving.
Yes, this is crucial for understanding diving physiology.
So when you're underwater exercising, it's not just the pressure, is it? What else comes into play?
Oh, a whole mix of things. Pressure is key, of course. But also the gas mix you're breathing, what you're actually doing swimming versus working.
Your body position.
Body position, yeah, and the water temperature, too, all influence the response.
And what's this about oxygen consumption going up at higher pressures, like at 5 atmospheres? That seems counterintuitive.
It does, doesn't it? But the main reason is increased respiratory resistance. The gases get denser under pressure.
Ah.
Imagine trying to breathe thicker air, almost. It just takes more effort for your lungs to move it. So your oxygen cost of breathing goes up.
Gotcha. So how much difference does it make? The source mentioned some numbers.
Yeah, it gave an example. At normal pressure, 1 ATA, maybe your O2 consumption meets about 81.5% of the actual need during exercise. But at 5 ATA, that drops to around 73.9%.
Wow, okay, so that's a significant hit to efficiency. What actually limits your ability to work hard down there then?
It's several factors piling up. That increased breathing resistance and energy costs we just talked about. Plus, you can get CO2 building up in the body. Divers might feel breathless, what's called dyspnea, and there can be some negative cardiovascular changes too.
Okay. And the heart rate thing is weird too. It tends to go down.
Yes, it often does. Bradycardia. It's partly the high partial pressure of oxygen itself acting on the heart and nervous system.
Oh.
Well, it seems to influence the parasympathetic system, the one that slows things down. Plus gas density, the pressure of inert gases, maybe even the water pressure itself, might interfere with the sympathetic system that usually speeds the heart up during exercise.
That's really surprising. More effort, but slower heart rate potentially. And divers feel more tired too.
Definitely. Subjective fatigue increases. Studies at really high simulated pressures, like 40 ATA, show divers reporting decreased vigilance, feeling like their body just isn't working as well, especially during compression and at depth.
Okay, deep pressure is tough. Let's flip it again. What about high oxygen but at normal pressure? Hyperoxia at 1 ATA.
Right, so just breathing oxygen-rich air at sea level, generally performance does tend to increase as the partial pressure of oxygen goes up.
So more oxygen helps.
To a point, yes.
Right.
Hyperbaric studies, where PO2 was, say, between 200 and 400 mmHg, showed this. And at 1 ATA, normal pressure, performance seems to improve continuously as you increase the oxygen fraction.
But there's a catch in actual hyperbaric chambers.
Yeah, remember the gas density issue.
Yeah.
At very high pressures, even with lots of oxygen, the sheer effort of breathing the dense gas can start to compromise performance again. It kind of cancels out some of the benefit.
Right, the breathing mechanics. And our source notes the specifics of heart response under hypoxia are elsewhere, but sticking with hyperoxia at 1 ATA, what about muscle oxygen use?
Well, interesting findings there. Under normal conditions, it seems like our leg muscles' peak oxygen uptake, their VO2 max, is limited by how much oxygen the blood can deliver.
Okay, the supply limit.
But when you breathe high oxygen at 1 ATA, even though the oxygen content in your blood goes way up, the maximum oxygen uptake in those leg muscles doesn't seem to increase proportionally. It hits a ceiling.
Okay, this is getting really complex. So now let's combine them. Exercise under hyperbaric conditions. HBO. High oxygen, high pressure. What happens then?
Yeah, this is where it gets really tricky to evaluate because you've got oxygen, pressure, and exercise all interacting. We understand the individual bits better than the combination, honestly.
Oh, we know some things.
We do. HBO at, say, 1.5 ATA seems to enhance some effects you see with just hyperoxia at normal pressure, but push the pressure higher, and some benefits might actually diminish, like reducing some metabolic issues from intense exercise might not happen as effectively.
And most studies looked at metabolism, right?
Yeah,
Like lactate.
exactly. Lactate accumulation is a big focus, relatively easy to measure.
Yeah.
We also often see ventilation breathing rate decrease and that bradycardia, the slower heart rate, during exercise under HBO.
What about maximum oxygen uptake, VO2 max?
Well, breathing 100% oxygen at 1 ATA gives a small bump, maybe 3%, but going up to 3 ATA pressure doesn't seem to increase VO2 max any further.
No extra gain.
Nope. And studies at 2 ATA HBO found no real difference in overall oxygen consumption or how much the muscle is extracted compared to just breathing normal air.
So even with all that extra oxygen physically dissolved in the blood plasma at 3 ATA,
it seems the active muscles just can't utilize significantly more. The limitation doesn't appear to be blood flow or diffusion to the muscle.
it's inside the muscle cell itself.
That's the suggestion.
Yeah.
The bottleneck seems to be within the muscle cell's machinery for using oxygen.
Fascinating. Okay, let's dig into that lactate aspect more. How does HBO affect lactate production and getting rid of it?
Our source highlights some quite compelling animal studies. Dogs exercising under 3 ATA, HBO, had significantly lower excess lactate levels compared to when they exercised breathing normal air.
Lower lactate, okay.
And interestingly, even when they switched back to normal air after the HBO session, those lactate levels stayed low for a bit.
Really? Why would that be?
Well, there are three main ideas proposed. One, the high oxygen supply just prevents the local muscle hypoxia that normally triggers lactate buildup. Simple supply and demand, almost.
Makes sense.
Two, HBO might actually stimulate the enzymes that help clear lactate out of the system, enhancing its removal.
So better cleanup crew.
Kinda, yeah. And three, HBO might directly inhibit some key enzymes in glycolysis, the pathway that actually produces the lactate.
Ah, so slowing down the production line. And maybe that inhibition lingers.
That could explain the persistent effect, yeah.
And it's not just muscle. The heart and liver help clear lactate under HBO too.
They do, yes, though it seems they might use up more glucose while doing it under HBO.
Okay. What about human studies?
Well, studies in healthy volunteers compared exercise with regular air, normal oxygen, and HBO at 1.5 ATA. In the recovery period after exercising with HBO, they saw significant drops in uric acid, lactate, and pyruvate compared to no HBO.
So faster biochemical recovery.
Looks like it. And ammonia levels were also interesting, significantly lower after exercise with HBO compared to just breathing normal oxygen.
It really seems to dampen down those metabolic byproducts. And they calculate this excess lactate using a formula, right?
Yes, the Excel calculation considers both lactate and pyruvate changes.
And the idea that glycolysis might be inhibited. Does that fit with anything else?
Well, glucose levels tend to fall during exercise under HBO, which supports that inhibition theory. And that could connect to the lower ammonia, maybe even lower urea, buildup uremia.
How so?
There's a suggestion that maybe more glycogenic amino acids, the ones that can become glucose, are shunted into the citric acid cycle for energy instead of being broken down in ways that produce ammonia.
Wow, it's all connected.
It really is. And animal work showed HBO reducing lactate and glycerol from muscle ischemia, restricted blood flow, possibly by influencing antioxidant enzymes too.
Okay, you mentioned ammonia. Let's pivot to that. We hear a lot about lactate fatigue, but ammonia's role is...
Less clear, yeah. But our muscles actually use a little ammonia even at rest. The whole body uses maybe around 8 millimoles per minute.
But after hard exercise, levels spike.
They can, quite dramatically.
Yeah.
Then they usually decline spontaneously in healthy people.
Why the spike?
It's mainly ammonia being released from the muscles during recovery as the muscle pH gets back to normal. That allows more ammonia to diffuse out.
And is high ammonia bad?
If it stays high for a long time, potentially, especially in untrained people or those with neurological issues. But healthy athletes generally tolerate it fine, no ammonia hangover.
And connecting back to HBO.
Ammonia levels tend to be lower in people exercising under HBO compared to normal conditions.
But we don't know exactly why.
The precise mechanism isn't fully nailed down. We know ammonia comes from deamination breaking down amino acids, and it's cleared mainly by the liver converting it to urea.
Right.
And HBO has been shown to lower ammonia in conditions like hepatic encephalopathy, and it can lower urea in exercising volunteers, possibly linked back to that glycolysis inhibition idea.
It keeps coming back to glycolysis. Okay, next angle. Antioxidant enzymes in the muscle. Exercise produces ROS, reactive oxygen species.
Right, ROS. They can cause oxidative stress, sure, but they're also important signaling molecules. They help muscles adapt to training.
And regular training boosts antioxidant enzymes like SOD, GPX, catalase.
Correct. SOD, GPX, CAT. Their activity increases with repeated aerobic exercise.
So since HBO also increases ROS production, what's the combined effect on these enzymes?
Well, it's complex and seems to depend on the specifics. Rat studies give us some clues.
Like what?
An acute single shot of high-pressure HBO3 ATA actually reduced catalase activity in slow-twitch muscles.
Reduced, okay.
But repeated exposures at a slightly lower pressure, 2 ATA, increased activity of a specific type of SOD, MNSOD, in fast-twitch muscles.
So it's not a simple up or down. HBO definitely modifies antioxidant enzyme activity, but how depends on the dose, duration, muscle type.
Precisely. It's a nuanced interaction.
Okay. What about blood flow to the muscles during exercise with HBO? All that extra oxygen, does it change blood delivery?
It does, significantly. That high oxygen content leads to vasoconstriction, blood vessels narrowing.
Oxygen narrows blood vessels.
Yes, oxygen itself is a vasoconstrictor. So even though there's more oxygen in the blood, the flow to the limbs is actually reduced.
Even during exercise?
Yes. One study looked at forearm exercise under hyperbaric hyperoxia. They found vessels were maybe slightly more responsive to constricting signals.
Okay.
But overall blood flow was significantly lower and vascular resistance higher, even when they blocked the main adrenergic receptors involved in constriction. Suggests other mechanisms are the main drivers of that reduced flow under HBO.
So more oxygen per mouthful of blood, but fewer mouthfuls getting delivered per minute, essentially.
Right. It's a decent analogy, yeah. The delivery system constricts.
Okay, which brings us to the potential risks. Oxygen toxicity. Is that a concern when exercising under HBO?
Generally below 3 ATA, the risk is considered low. But there's always been this question, does exercise make you more susceptible?
And what's the evidence?
Well, studies breathing oxygen at 2 ATA during exercise show it tends to lower ventilation rate and helps normalize blood pH and CO2 levels,
That sounds good.
mostly. Looking at the brain, oxygen use might slightly increase or decrease, but it usually doesn't cause a big spike in the oxygen levels in the veins leaving the brain.
And exercise affects brain blood flow velocity differently than just resting hyperoxia.
Yeah, exercise tends to counteract the decrease in cerebral blood flow velocity seen with hyperoxia alone. It might even increase it a bit further at higher oxygen pressures.
But wait, if ventilation goes down, doesn't CO2 build up? You said CO2 is a vasodilator?
Exactly, that's the potential catch. CO2 retention could cause vasodilation in the brain, widening those vessels,
Increasing blood flow and potentially increasing oxygen delivery to the brain tissue.
which could, theoretically, increase the risk of oxygen neurotoxicity. It's a concern.
Any other factors? Body temperature?
Rising body temp during exercise could increase toxicity risk, but that's usually pretty well managed in hyperbaric chambers.
And peripheral vasoconstriction. Does exercise override that?
It can, yes. Exercise tends to cause vasodilation in working muscles. If that counteracts the general vasoconstriction from hyperoxia, tissues might end up being exposed to higher oxygen concentrations than they would be at rest under HBO.
So it's definitely a balancing act. Complex interactions with potential risks to manage. Okay, let's try and wrap this up. Bringing it all together, what's the big picture on exercise under hyperbaric conditions?
Well, the key takeaway seems to be that while HBO can reduce some of the biochemical fallout from exercise, like lactate,
Yeah.
it doesn't actually seem to let you perform longer or harder while you're in the chamber.
Interesting. So no immediate performance boost during the session itself. What about effects after an HBO session? Does it help with later exercise?
Surprisingly, maybe not directly for performance. Studies looking at acute HBO exposure found it didn't significantly improve performance in subsequent high-intensity, short bursts of exercise.
Huh. But what about recovery? You mentioned the biochemical improvements.
That seems to be the more promising angle, yes. By helping the body clear metabolic byproducts faster, HBO might potentially shorten recovery time after really exhaustive exercise.
So a potential tool for recovery, maybe, rather than direct performance enhancement?
That's how it lists currently. Definitely needs more research to figure out its place, if any, in athletic training protocols.
But you mentioned a potential application in rehabilitation.
Yes, based on what we know, there's a really intriguing idea. Using HBO to help patients with neurological disabilities like hemiplegia or paraplegia.
How so?
The idea is that HBO might allow them to undertake more strenuous exercise more safely than they could manage breathing normal air, potentially accelerating their rehab.
That could be really significant for those patients. It really makes you think, doesn't it? This whole interplay of oxygen, pressure, exercise.
It's incredibly complex.
And thinking long term, what are the implications of us getting better at manipulating these factors? For elite athletes, sure, but also for therapy. And what ethical questions pop up when we start tweaking these fundamental physiological limits?
That's the provocative thought, isn't it? Where does this lead, both scientifically and ethically? Lots to mull over.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive. Thanks for exploring it with me.